within the figure skating world, we know backflip as one of the easiest things to do. But the wild ice, that was something that I'd never experienced before. And I knew since the beginning of my healing journey, this journey going inwards, I've started to connect deeply to nature and having this relationship with nature that I'd never had before. How incredible would it be to do what I love to do most, skate, express myself, but do it on ice that was formed by Mother Nature, and then be in nature with mountains and trees. I'm like, I could do that and never skate again, and it would be the most beautiful moment of my life. And being able to be there and be so present and kind of soak in all of this was magical. And then I shared that, and that went viral.
Let's talk about that day that you shot that video that went viral, right? Had you done a lot of wild ice skating, and the backflip thing, was that like your signature move, or is that something had just started practicing?
Yeah, backflip is something I've been doing since I was 15 years old. It's something
Okay,
I
so
saw.
you doing a backflip is like somebody just like doing a cartwheel. It's like nothing. You think
Basically,
nothing of it.
basically, it's something I've been doing for a very long time. And within the figure skating world, we know backflip as one of the easiest things to do. Yes, getting over the fear of going backwards, being on skates, on ice, like all of that. Yes, that's one thing. But once you get over that and you learn how to do the backflip, the margin of error is so small. Like you can, it's really hard to miss. So it's something that I've been throwing for over a decade now. But the wild ice, that was something that I'd never experienced before. And I knew since the beginning of my healing journey, this journey going inwards, I've started to connect deeply to nature, and having this relationship with nature that I'd never had before. And one day I had this thought, like, gosh, how incredible would it be to do what I love to do most, skate, express myself, but do it on ice that was formed by Mother Nature, and then be in nature with mountains and trees. And I'm like, that would be like, I could do that and never skate again, and it would be the most beautiful moment of my life. And so a few years later, once the first video kind of went viral, the one that I just kind of went into a local neighborhood, found a ring, threw a backflip, and that started kind of going off a little bit. A friend of mine was like, hey, I know someone in the mountains that goes out and finds ice, and I know you've been wanting to skate, so let me put you in touch with them. And so I reached out to the guy, and he was like, I'm going like literally tomorrow morning at like 6 a.m. if you want to join. And I was like, done deal. I'm grabbing my skates. I'm going to head out there. And so we did. But I had prepared something that I wanted to shoot out there. I knew that the day was going to come that I was going to be able to go out there and shoot in the mountains. So I wanted to prepare something special that I could feel deeply connected to when I'm performing, and find a way to share that beauty with everyone. So I prepared something, got someone to come, got someone to shoot my video, and then we stepped out there. And the first hour, I just kind of stood there. I just like spent the whole hour just being in awe of the beauty that it is. And even the quality of the ice was completely different. It's not like what we have in indoor rinks. And yes, indoor rinks are maintained Zambonis, all of that technology, like it's smooth, it's great. But what Mother Nature creates when that first freeze, there's nothing like it. You can't recreate that sensation on your blades. And so I spent the first hour just being in awe of that. And then we shot that video, and I felt so present. Like going out in nature and doing what I do in nature allows me to tap into a place of presence that that is it's even easier to access than when I'm performing in an indoor ring. And so being able to be there and be so present and kind of soak in all of this was magical. And then I shared that, and that went viral. And so it reaffirmed for me that everything that I was doing and the path that I was on right now was exactly where I was meant to be and exactly what I was meant to be doing. And I shouldn't, even though there's no shouldn't, but there's no reason for me to question that anymore, because it's so in line, and it's so real that I just that was the start for all of this now. And that moment led to now me talking to you, which is, me like geeking out hard.
Man, it's crazy. It's like after hearing your whole story, it's like every single thing that you experienced, like you're the only person that could have done that, that could have shot those videos. There's no other skater that could have done that. And it's like that guy with the cranberry juice on the skateboard, you know?
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
look
yeah.
if you look at his account, I went back and looked at his account, and he would post these videos of him lip syncing and basically grooving out to these different songs for like over a year. And that was just so that day that he shot that one, that was just another day. That was nothing special for him.
Yeah, but
And
to the world, it was something that resonated with people so deeply, and I think that's the beauty also of social media, is there's this ability to be who you are and do the things that you've been doing. I'm not skating any differently now than I was when I first retired, or even when I was competing, but my skills are the same, but the way people interact with it and engage with it is completely different now. And a big part of it is my intention and the way the space that I'm operating from, but then also is the ability to be able to be on a phone and be able to experience people's lives in a way that you wouldn't be able to without the beauty of social media. And yes, there's so much, a lot of negative things about social media, but for me, it changed my life in some of the most beautiful ways. And I used to be the guy that like didn't want to be on social media, didn't want to post, and didn't want to do any of these things. And then it turned out that it's one of the most beautiful gifts that I could have received in my life. And so I'm just so deeply grateful to these incredible platforms and the people that are existing within it.
You also had to overcome your resistance to being yourself, to completely showing up 100% unapologetic. This is who I am. This is what I'm bringing to this, my expression of this sport. And that's where I think that's the lightning in the bottle that those videos captured.
Absolutely. And
that inspired.
That I want to give a lot of credit to my wife. I was so scared. I had so much fear in presenting myself authentically like that, for so many reasons, of course, but I felt so uncomfortable, and the gentle push forward, the gentle embrace, the unconditional love that I received throughout this process of me trying to muster the courage to do it. If she wasn't there, none of this would have happened. She gave me the strength to tap into that space and not be afraid. And it's an incredibly beautiful thing, and I'm so grateful for her support every day. And she's only been that for me. So yes, it was a lot of my journey, my career, and everything that I've done, and the journey that I went in, to be able to find that authenticity and find that space of who Elladj Balde is in this lifetime. But it's with her help that I was able to find the courage to share that with everyone.
You started this alliance. Talk about that. What is the intention behind it? And why did you start it with I think 10 other skaters, as opposed to doing it by yourself, or maybe with a couple people?
Yeah, so the Figure Skating Diversity and Inclusion Alliance started basically right after the murder of George Floyd. There was an energy and a movement there that I think none of us had ever seen really up until that time. And so a few skaters and we just started connecting with each other in a way that we hadn't before. And we started talking about our own experiences in skating. And we started to realize that no matter where you were from, whether you were from Europe, North America, South Africa, all of our experiences were similar. We're very, very, very similar. And so that's when we were like, okay, well, let's create a safe space for all of us from all over the world to be able to step into it and share and feel safe to be able to share our experiences and feel supported. And so we kind of started just for the first few weeks, just talking to each other, skaters from all over the world. We'd join on Zoom and just talk. And then we started to see that like national sport organizations like Skate Canada, US Figure Skating would post things like, we support the Black Lives Matter movement and this and blah, 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 and all of that. And we were like, none of your actions have showed any support. So you're saying this, but like, what are you going to do? This seems extremely performative. And so what we decided to do is we wanted to form this alliance that was going to keep these national sport organizations accountable for actually making change and wanting to create the kind of environment that the way that we experience the sport, maybe the next generation of skaters, of Black, Indigenous, and people of color would have a different experience. And so we wanted to keep them accountable for that. And so we founded the Figure Skating Diversity and Inclusion Alliance, and we basically made these calls to action, and we send them to these national sport organizations. And US Figure Skating, I don't want to, not a lot shifted, but Skate Canada, a lot of things started changing, and we started to see that they're really taking this seriously. And so then we saw that there's this opportunity to change the way that our sport is operating. And so that's why we felt like as a group of people, as an alliance, we would be stronger in being able to keep these people accountable. And then at the same time, there's a group of incredible Black women that started this mentorship program called Big Skater, Little Skater, and basically they would link mentors, so like people like us that have made it in the sport, and they would connect them with younger Black skaters who would potentially want some guidance or need some guidance, or just bridge that gap between some of us that made it in the sport and they could be there as a support system for these younger skaters on their journeys. And so that was something that was really beautiful, and that I feel like really proud that I've been part of that group. And then last year, my wife and we started our own foundation called the Skate Global Foundation. And that's something that we've been really passionate about. And we've seen a couple things that that figure skating would, we talked earlier about the price of figure skating and how expensive it is, and people being priced out of the sport. Well, another issue is also accessibility to ice. A lot of underserved communities don't have rinks or outdoor rinks. There's a lot of rinks in Canada, almost everywhere. Every neighborhood has one, but most of them are middle class or upper class neighborhoods. And so in underserved communities, you don't see a lot of these rinks. And so the access to figure skating or just hockey or skating in general isn't the same. And so we started to realize that there's things that we could do to help in different ways. And so that's why we started the Skate Global Foundation. And it's basically based under three pillars. One is EDI, everything that has to do with equity, diversity, inclusion. The second one is mental health, because it's such an important topic. It's such an important thing to talk about, and both my wife and I are so deeply committed to the journey, the healing journey. So it's something we want to be able to find ways to give back on, and then climate change. And so every project that we do kind of falls under one of these three pillars. But right now we're really focused on EDI because it's my immediate experience right now. It's what I'm it's what I've been living in the past two years, especially since the murder of George Floyd. And so I want to, since the train is kind of going, we want to put a lot of our resources in that to help further the change as much as possible. And so, yeah, it's something that we feel like has been missing in skating, and there's a lot of things that are still missing in skating, but slowly, step by step, we'll try to bring in as much as many resources and as much change as we can.
You mentioned in your last performance the visual that you had, and I know that with your alliance and foundation, you teach visualization. You talk about the importance of visualizing. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit, in case somebody's about to go into a very important experience, and how can they use that tool to sort of amplify or enhance their experience?
Yeah, well, that's something I started doing once I started practicing meditation. A friend of mine who was an athlete was talking to me about visualization, and I didn't really know what it was, but basically what he explained to me was like, your subconscious mind doesn't necessarily know the difference between something that's happening in real time right now, right here, or something that's happening in your mind. And so he told me there was this research that was done where they took a group of basketball players and they split the group between two. And one group was allowed to go practice free throws every day for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of weeks. The other group was only allowed to visualize themselves doing the free throws for the same amount of time. They weren't allowed to go and touch a ball and actually throw a ball. And at the end of the study, they realized that the people that were visualizing versus the people that weren't visualizing had equal, if not better, success than the people that were there in the gym every day practicing. So I was like, what? And when he started telling me these things, I was like, okay, well, tell me more. Like, let's get into this. And so basically what I started doing is I started to realize, well, if I combine visualization and I combine daily training, that's almost like I'm doing another set of training without using my body. I could use my mind to do a whole training session. And so I would sit there basically, and I would visualize myself doing all of my jumps in my mind. I would go through it in slow motion. I would go through every detail, what it feels like in my body, what it looks like outside of my body. And I would go through every motion. I would go through the entire routine. I would put the song in my head, and I would go through my performance, and I would imagine myself doing it exactly how I want to do it every day. And by doing that every day, your subconscious mind, again, doesn't know the difference whether it's happening in real, it's if it actually happened or not. And so I did that constantly. And by the end, I was, and at first it's difficult with sports. It's kind of difficult to imagine yourself doing things very well, because I know for me and a lot of athletes, when you start doing it, you start feeling yourself making mistakes, or like things are a little bit weird because your brain is not trained to do these motions without actually needing to do them physically. And so, but the more that you continue to train that part of your brain, everything's becomes so smooth, and your body retains all that information. And it's the most powerful tool that I've ever used as an athlete and in my life. I think visualization is a practice that everyone should learn. It's powerful. It's powerful as hell. It changed my life in so many ways.
So let's talk about the early years of when you were just a kid, when you were first getting introduced to skating, which you weren't a big fan of in the early days. What were you into, and how did you? I know your mom was a former skater, but talk about that moment where she introduced you, or how you found out about that, and at the same time, what was going on in your household? You know, you the oldest of the kids? I know you had an older
I
sister,
am
but she,
now. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I am the oldest. Yeah, yeah, I have two younger sisters. So
Mm,
yeah, so yeah, the journey has been quite interesting. My father, obviously from Africa, Guinea. He was born in a small village in the mountains, and he had the opportunity to go study further his education in the Soviet Union. I think in the 70s, 80s, there was like some sort of program that allowed African students to go study in the Soviet Union to further their education. And my dad was picked. He was one of them. And yeah, I met my mom in a city called Tashkent, which is now in Uzbekistan. My older sister was born. A few years later, I was born. She was diagnosed with leukemia, and so we left Moscow to go to Germany to get some treatments for her. She ended up passing away in Germany, and then at the same time, the Soviet Union had just collapsed, and so my parents didn't really want to go back to Russia. Because it was chaos. I mean, apparently the mafia had taken over everything. It was just it was not a place where my parents wanted to be. And then my dad being African, in Russia, there was a lot of racism, and so they just didn't want to go there. They didn't want to go to Africa, and they had the opportunity to come to Canada, Montreal. And so that's when we immigrated. I think I was 2 years old. And then my sister was on her way, Julia. She was born a couple months after we came to Canada. And then a few years later, yeah, my mom has been a figure skating fan her whole life. She started skating as a kid, but had to quit very early on because she moved from the city that she was in Russia to Uzbekistan, and there wasn't any rinks out there. So she had to stop at the age of like 14, but always remained very passionate about the sport. And she introduced my older sister to it. And then eventually when it was my turn, around 6 years old, she introduced me to it because she realized that I needed an outlet for the energy that I had in my body. I had so much energy. I was a hyperactive kid, and needing an outlet for that. And sitting at a piano wasn't going to work for me. I would sit there for 2-3 minutes, and then I start running around the piano, trying to backflip over it, things that kids shouldn't be doing. And so she introduced me to skating at the age of 6. And that first moment of being on the ice, I remember it being really playful. It was fun. I was there with my mom, and she was like teaching me a couple things here and there, and I felt very comfortable on the ice very quickly. It was something that came quite naturally to me. And so those first few moments on the ice in my memory were all fun and games. And but that changed very quickly because at the age of 6.5, I was already competing. So she had put me with a private coach, a Russian coach, and we started very seriously training. And by 6.5, I was already competing. But again, I was so not ready for it at that age. I wasn't, I had never been in a competition setting. It felt very uncomfortable to me. And with the culture that my mom's from in Russia, figure skating it's like hockey in Canada or football in America. It's a really, really popular sport, and a lot of kids go into figure skating to help their families out of poverty. And so figure skating, you go into it with the idea of being the world champion, Olympic champion. And if that's not your goal, then you're kind of wasting your time. And that's kind of the mentality that was instilled in me at a very young age, right away at the age of 6.5. And so that's where I feel like subconsciously I was resisting that a lot. It was a lot of pressure at that age, and I didn't know if I enjoyed it. And so I tried to hide my skates in the closet. I tell my mom I lost them. I was doing everything to try and not go to the rink. But she persevered. She found my skates. She put them back in my bag, took me to the rink, and she sacrificed a lot for me to be able to skate at that age. She didn't have a car. She didn't speak French or English. So she would take me on the bus at 5 a.m. when it's like -30 outside in the winter with my two younger sisters, across the city, take me to skating, then take me to school, then back to skating. So she did a lot, and I owe everything that I'm experiencing now with figure skating to her, because she didn't let me run away from it.
You may have been too young to, I don't know, remember the experience with your older sister who passed away, but what was the vibe like in your house with that having happened? And now you're the oldest, and your parents, did you feel any of that when you're growing up with them? Was there tension, stress, any kind of weirdness happening in your family?
Absolutely. I think the death of a child is something that lives with the parents for a very long time, and it's probably one of the most traumatic experiences that a parent can experience. And so definitely my parents suffered from it daily. I don't have any memories of her, but deep down, I've always felt her. And my mom was telling me stories that when we would go to the hospital, anytime I would come near the hospital, I would just start sobbing, crying. I would be hysterical. And I couldn't even enter the hospital. And as soon as they would take me away, I would stop crying. And so I know I felt the weight of the situation. And my parents, it really broke them in so many ways. Obviously, I've had a few conversations with them. I know that everyone has different coping mechanisms when it comes to grieving and losing a loved one, especially a child. And I think both my parents, that was almost the moment where they started drifting away, which I know happens a lot in marriages and in couples when they lose a child. And my dad, from what I'm understanding, the way that he dealt with it was almost tried to forget about it and just move forward as if it hadn't happened. And I know that was really difficult for my mom to handle, because she felt so deeply connected and to my sister, and it wasn't in her capacity to be able to move forward in that way. And so she felt like she was maybe abandoned by my dad in her grieving process. And so I know that just put a lot of weight on them. And then on top of that, immigrating to a country with no money. They had maybe a couple $100 in their pockets. With me being 2 years old, my sister on her way, my mom not speaking French or English, so not able to work. My dad having to work day and night. He would sometimes go to school, because he had to redo his diploma because it wasn't accepted once he came here to Canada. So he would go to school from, let's say, 8 to 4, and then go to work from 5 to 6, and then go straight to school. And he would do that 3 days in a row sometimes. So the dynamic was definitely heavy, chaotic. But I know my parents did everything they could to not let that have an impact on us. But as kids, we absorb everything, we feel everything, we feel the energies and the emotions that our parents are experiencing. So we did absorb a lot of that, and that at the same time, I feel like me going into this sport and throwing me into figure skating with this idea of needing to be the best, it all of these layers kind of compounded on top of each other to kind of put me on this journey that I've been on. And obviously there's been a pretty powerful healing journey for me to process all of these things. Because the other thing too is my mom, when my sister was diagnosed with leukemia, I was inside my mom in her womb. And so the months before my birth, and then the first 2 years of my birth was this process of absorbing trauma, and so yeah, that's kind of the journey that we've that I've been on, and my sisters have been on for quite some time now.
Was there a focus on achievement in your household growing up in those early years, or was it about being in the moment? And what was the overall ideology? Because your parents both immigrants, and I don't know if you were even speaking English at that point, but I know your mother tongue sounds like it was Russian and French, right? So
Russian and French, yeah.
What was like the idea of success, like as a young person, when your families would talk about that kind of thing?
It was very, very achievement based. I mean, if you take, for example, we were talking about figure skating and my mom in Russia. Right away as a kid, it was the idea of needing to be the best, and we're going to train every day to be the best. And a lot of what I was experiencing, a lot of the love that I was getting was dependent on my performances. When I was skating really well, it was making my mom really happy and loving. And then when I wasn't skating well, I wasn't receiving the same kind of energy. So there was already there kind of this conditioning of I need to perform to be loved. But then on the other side, my father, for him, it was all about academia. The reason why he was able to leave Africa, leave the village, leave a really difficult and being in a situation where there's not a lot of opportunities, not a lot of money. In order to leave that space, he had to be the best in his university. He had to finish in the top 5 in the country in order to be sent to Russia to further his education. When he was in Russia, he was always the first of his class, needing to be the best of his class. And so growing up, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 during elementary school, not only did I have this this achievement-based idea in my mind in figure skating, but also in school. My dad was very strict with us with school. We would sit with him for 2-3 hours, and we'd have to recite all the multiplication tables, the like different mathematical equations. He would teach me. He was an engineer in computers, and so software engineer, and so he taught me how to build a website when I was like 7 years old. So there was a lot of these elements coming together that that made it a very particular and unique situation at home, and a way for me to grow up.
Mm-hmm. Talk about the challenges you had with code switching as a young person in figure skating, and then talk about the whole idea of that being seen as a girl's activity, and how you kind of negotiated that as a young person.
The first time, I'll start with the girl sport, because I feel like that was one of the first things that kind of came to me. I vividly remember the first time I ever felt shame for doing figure skating. I was maybe 10 years old, and I had won my first competition. I was so proud. I was wearing my medal, and I left the rink still in my costume, my figure skating costume, because I was excited. I was a kid. And so I show up in our neighborhood, and we get out of the car to go to our house, and my neighbor's outside playing, and I was like, I'm gonna go talk to my friend and just just show him like what I got. And so I run up to him like super excited, and I was like, look, like I got my first medal, like this is, I'm so excited. And literally his reaction was looking me from head to toe, and then laughing out loud and saying, what the hell are you wearing? And I completely forgot that I was still wearing my figure skating costume. But I remember that was the first time that I was like, oh, okay. Maybe what I feel figure skating is what I know figure skating to be, isn't what people around me perceive it as. And so I remember feeling this immense sense of shame. And then after that, there were so many instances where people would ask me what sport I do, and when I would tell them I'm a figure skater, they would laugh at me and say, oh, this is a girl sport, which is wild because sports don't have gender, but society has labeled figure skating as a girl sport. And so I was faced with that daily. And I even went to the point where I changed my story. When people would ask me if I was an athlete, I'd be like, yeah. And they asked me what sport I did, I would be like, I'm a soccer player, or I do track and field, or basketball, because I was tired of seeing people's reactions and having to defend myself and prove that I'm man enough to be in this sport. And that was a really difficult journey. And I kind of suppressed it for a very long time as a teenager. And then that came soaring back up in my early mid-20s, and having to redefine what it is for me to be a man, and embrace this thing that I love to do, and find a way to not only live within it but thrive within it with the deepest sense of authenticity and pride. And so that was a difficult one. And then you add the layer on top of that. I was the only Black kid around skating. And so that was also another layer where people would look at me and say, like, Black people don't skate, or like, you should go and play basketball or go run track and field. Like, why are you doing this sport? But then within the sport, there was also this idea that, like, I wasn't fully accepted as who I was, because I wanted to skate to hip hop songs. I wanted to move in a certain way. But if I did that, judges wouldn't like it, right? And so I learned right away to please judges and please all these people within the figure skating community, and shift who I am as a human being in order to not only please these people, but achieve success, because I wanted to be successful. That was like this idea that I was going to be an Olympic champion. And so in order to get there, I need to change who I am. And that's when I started listening to different types of music. I started dressing differently. I literally started talking and walking differently, just because I felt like I needed to fit that mold of what an Olympic champion looks like. And so these were the beginnings for me of learning how to code switch and have to adapt. And then I would get rewarded whenever I would do that, right? So subconsciously, it keeps reinforcing this idea that who you are isn't enough. And so I was being rewarded for skating more classical, or more in a more balletic kind of way. Or when I would go out and hang out with skaters, and they would be like, oh, you're so cool. Like, you're not like the other Black people, right? It's like, we accept the white version of you. But if you were to be anything else, we wouldn't want to be around that. So all of these things kind of reinforce this idea again, that, like, there's no way that me being authentic to who I was going to get me anywhere, was going to give me anything positive. So I discarded that for many years.
What was your dad's mindset in all of this? Did you ever talk to him about it, or was it mostly you and your mom with this figure skating endeavor? Because your dad having experienced the racism. It was
mostly me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I internalized a lot of these experiences as a kid and as a teenager. I didn't talk about them to anyone. My parents didn't really know. My mom didn't really know what I was experiencing. Yes, she could see it sometimes with, like, I would skate really well, and then I would get a score from the judges, and it's completely not reflective of what I did as a performance. But again, you can't quantify that. You can't say that that's because of systemic racism, or because there's so many reasons why I could have gotten a lower mark. And so I feel like I never really had these conversations with my parents. I knew what my dad had experienced in Russia. He spoke about it so many times, and then even him coming to Canada and not being able to get a job. So I understood already at an early age what systemic racism was, and what this experience is, and was for him. But I kind of, because my goal was to be an Olympic champion, I like put all of that aside and just like had the blinders on and was just like walking forward until I couldn't anymore. But I know if I had that conversation with him, I'm sure if I had that conversation with him, though, I know that he would have most likely been able to guide me in a certain way, as to how to process these things, because I know that he had to learn how to move through that and not allow that to intoxicate his body. And so I probably could have had that conversation, but again, I was just so focused on this one goal of mine.
So you start placing in competitions, and you're still a relatively young person, teenager and all of that. Can you just tell us what a week in the life is like of someone who's focused on being a championship skater? And then secondly, when did you find out you were a Black skater?
Yeah. So a typical week, let's say early, like junior high school, I would basically go to the rink in the morning, around 5 a.m., 6 a.m., would do an hour session with my coach. And then from there, I would head to school. I would take the bus for about an hour and a half, head to school, do class from 8 to 12. And because I was in a sports study program here in Quebec, they allow students that are training in sports at a high level to do the half of the day school, and then the other half of the day the respective sports. And so I would go to school from 8 to 12, and then from there I would head to the rink and skate from 1 to 4, and then take the bus back to my neighborhood, which was about an hour and a half, depending on the day. Then get home, and my dad would be there, and then we would sit down and do homework until whatever time we needed but however much time we needed to finish the homework. And what he would do is he would also give me extra homework. He would make me study the chapters that we were going to study maybe in a month or two to be ahead of schedule. And so we would do that. And then I'd basically eat, go to bed, and restart the next day. It would be 5 days. Normally it would be 5 days a week, like that. And then to answer your question of like when I noticed or realized that I was a Black figure skater, for me, I think when I started to, when I was around 13, 14, I had been in skating for a few years, and like all the years before that, I was just listening to what my mom and my coaches kind of told me to do, and I would just do it. And then, but around 13, 14, 15, I started really like vibing with hip hop music, breakdancing, dressing in a certain way. Like I had a certain culture that I loved to follow and I identified with. And so then I wanted to start bringing that into my world of figure skating, because again, it's a sport, but it's also an art form. You get to explore and choose what you want to skate to. And when I started bringing those ideas up, they'd be like, "No, that's not going to work. Like the judges are, they're old school. They're not going to like it." But then I started to try to force things a little bit, and wanted to grow my hair, get cornrows, and people from Team Canada or a different places would come to me and be like, if I wanted to grow my hair and let it out, they'd be like, "Oh, it looks dirty, it looks nappy, like cut your hair, or you can't wear this because it's too sloppy, it's too." And so that's when I started to realize that, okay, like what I identify with and who I am again, isn't really accepted in the sport. And so that's when it kind of started changing for me. That's when I started to switch. I went back into, okay, well, I'm going to skate to classical music and I'm going to operate a certain way. But then it switched again when I saw for the first time a black male figure skater skate live in front of me at a competition and being truly, authentically himself. Changed my world. It changed my world. His name was Maxime Billy Fortin. He was from Quebec City. He was adopted from Haiti. And oh man, he was out there. He was popping on the ice. He was doing, not only was he doing like triple axels and quads, like all the most difficult jumps, but his energy was so raw. Like I still have chills talking about it now because my jaw dropped, my eyes started sparkling for the first time, and I started to realize, like, wow, this is what I want to be. Like this guy out there, the way that he's skating is so true to himself, and it's exactly how I want to do things. That after that, I was like, okay, I got to start shifting things. And I was maybe around 18 years old. And that's when I started my journey of finding this authentic self and committing to only operating from that space. It was a long journey, but that's kind of where it started for me.
A couple just behind the scenes questions for people who maybe have kids who are interested in this. There's a huge financial cost to being a figure skater that a lot of people don't realize. And there is constant judgment, there are eating disorders. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed all of that? Was there any mental health stuff that you experienced as a result of some of that?
Yeah. So the cost, let's start with the cost. The cost is ridiculously expensive. I mean, a pair of, like, as a kid, when you're just starting, just joining a club is a few $100s. And then ice time you have to pay is a couple grand a year. And then your coaches are a couple grand, if not more, a year. And then costumes, and then all of the other things. So you're starting at like $10,000-$15,000 a year if you want to be a competitive skater as a kid. And then the thing is that the more that you grow in the sport, the more expensive it gets. So towards the end of my career, I was dishing out like $50,000-$60,000 a year to compete. Right? Like it's unbelievable. And my parents, they helped me as much as they could. They did everything, every penny they had, every extra cent they had, they put it towards my skating. And I had two other sisters that were also passionate about skating. So those three of us in the family wanting to skate. And unfortunately, because I was the oldest kid and I was progressing really fast, my mom decided to put all of the funds towards me, and which helped me tremendously. But then it left with both of my sisters not having the same resources, even though they were as passionate as I was with the sport. They didn't have the opportunity to do that. So that's one way that it's impacted us. But then my parents had to file for bankruptcy a couple of times because of debts and because of needing to do these things. But I was really lucky as well that I had coaches that would barely charge us. I mean, my second coach, like for 8 years, like we barely paid him, and he was okay with it. He saw the talent. He was like, whenever you have something, just like, whatever it is, we're here. We want to help. We believe in him. And so I was lucky to get that. But then not only was that there during my early years, but I always, for some reason, fell on coaches that were very lenient with payments. And so my parents and my family caught a massive break. And if it wasn't for these coaches allowing me to train with them almost for free, I wouldn't be here now. And so it's something that is a problem in our sport. And obviously a lot of us are trying to find different ways to bridge that gap. But it's it's not easy. And then when you talk about mental health, all of these things kind of, pile on top of each other. I mean, as a kid, I didn't know it at the time, but I realize it now. I was suffering from OCD from a very young age because there's so much stress and there's so much anxiety in my mind and in my body needing to control things. I would I would I would become um like I would need to control everything in my surrounding in order for me to feel okay. And that led me to in my 20s, like going through a whole day, like making sure if the day before I had a good competition or I had a good practice and I entered the rink holding the door with my left hand, I would need to make sure I did the same thing. If I stepped into the room with my right foot, I needed to do the same thing. If I put my skate on in it became that my whole day was packed with these things that I needed to do in order to feel in control. And when I realized that that wasn't helping me, and when I started to wanting to break down those ways of operating, I suffered a lot. And as athletes, we suffer a lot with mental health because there's so much that rides on performance, and there's so much that comes from achieving, and being in the state of mind of needing to achieve constantly puts you consistently in the space of always needing to go and get more. And you're always in the space that what you have right now and what you've done right now isn't enough, and you're not enough, and you need to continue to get more to validate your sense of worthiness. And so the description of of unworthiness, every single athlete, at least that I know, a lot of figure skaters struggle with that, because it's especially in a sport where you're judged. A judged sport is very subjective, and so you're constantly in this space where it's not just like start the timer, you cross the line first, that's it, you're champion, right? There's all of these layers as to these elements that could lead you to become a champion, but you're constantly trying to do everything you can to control as many of these elements as possible, and 90% of these elements aren't out of your control, right? And so you're constantly stuck in this cycle, and it's hard. And then for me as a boy in skating, I struggled with my mental health when it came to, again, redefining who I was as a man. I questioned so much of these things, and needed to almost step away from the sport and start the journey inwards in order for me to be where I am now, where I feel like I can be within this ecosystem and thrive and be grounded and be centered and operate from a space of truth. But it was a long journey to get there. So mental health is something that a lot of athletes deal with. And yes, we have sports psychologists, but sports psychologists help you perform better. It doesn't necessarily help you with the processing of emotions and finding your just diving in.
So just before you started to kind of go inside to seek fulfillment, you had a plan, right? You had this plan: I'm going to be in the Olympics, I'm going to try out for 2014 and then again and later. Talk about your plan and how all that went, and then how that kind of led to the Africa trip, which then led to the realization that you shouldn't be externalizing this stuff.
The first plan was to go to potentially qualify or go to the qualifications for the 2010 Olympics. But then I got injured. I had knee surgery, and that was kind of the first time that I injured myself seriously, where I had to miss a whole year of skating. And that was a struggle. I was 18. I was just kind of like on the rise. And so in my mind, that kind of year of stopping was really difficult, but I did learn a lot. I started to understand the concept of, if you take a situation that can be perceived as bad or as a failure, and you take that and transform and play with it a little bit, you can transform it into the most beautiful gift that you've ever received. And that's when that kind of started simmering for me. And then 2014 happened, where again, it was going to be in Russia. I was going to be, it was going to be the beginning of my journey to becoming an Olympic champion. And I didn't qualify for these games. And that really, it started the questioning of, is this really my path? But I quickly, it's like the question kind of started creeping in, and I quickly was like, no, put that away. we got work to do. We got somewhere we got to be. We got something we got to do. Let's just keep going. And so I kept going for a whole year.
Did you have help with that? Did someone help to keep you focused on what was forward instead of what didn't happen?
I was so motivated. Like I was so dedicated to this idea. I was so sold to the idea of being an Olympic champion. My entire self-worth, my who I was wrapped in this idea of being an Olympic champion. So I believed it 100%. It was like I was almost living in a form of delusion, in a way. Like not because I didn't have the talent to become an Olympic champion, but this idea, the fixed idea that I had, that there's no other path of life possible except that one. I was totally dialed into that. And so I didn't even need anyone to kind of redirect me. I did it myself. And so that whole year after that was rough. It was really, really, really rough. Training was tough. I didn't compete well. But again, that year, the top guy in Canada was taking a year off. And so now the door was open. So it was my turn. It was my turn to step into this space and be this Canadian champion and finally start my journey towards being an Olympic champion. You see how it's like that. Those are ways that just my mind would automatically put things in these perspectives. And so I showed up at nationals, and a couple weeks before, my father called me, and my grandfather had he fell into a coma. He was 99 years old. Heart just kind of stopped for a little bit. They kind of revived him, but he was in a coma for a little bit. So my dad was telling me he was going to go to Africa to go visit his father for hopefully at least being able to be there. If he was going to pass, he was going to be there with him. But if he wakes up, then at least you'll have, maybe one last conversation with him before he passes. And so, but I was, and he asked me to come with him, but I said I couldn't, because I had nationals, and then I was going to be national champion, and then I was going to go to 4 continents championships, and then worlds. And so I had all this plan laid out, and so I showed up at nationals, and it was a complete disaster. I honestly felt like I wasn't in my own body when I was on the ice. I stepped out, and it was almost like nothing worked. Everything I knew about figure skating, all of a sudden, it's like I forgot everything, and it just happened just like that. And so the competition ended, and not only did I not win, but I had my worst the worst results that I had ever had at these Canadian nationals. And I sat there, and I was like, I don't understand. And I kept asking myself, like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? This question. And then right away, the thought came of like, well, if this is not who I'm going to be, if this is not the path that is meant for me, then who am I? Who are you? Why are you even doing this? All the reasons why I'm doing this sport were based in external factors. Nothing was coming from within. There was no fulfillment in what I was doing. I was only there to please, to achieve. And as soon as all of these ideas these thoughts came into my mind, my immediate thing was wanting to shut it all off again, because that's the thing that I do as an athlete. You learn to shut off your emotions, shut off your brain, and just kind of stick to the plan. And so I was trying to do that, and it wasn't working. And right away, I also noticed and realized that I had this free time now. And so I called my dad and I was like, I'm coming to Africa with you. And that's when the journey just like really took off for me, because I showed up. I showed up to Africa with my dad. I got to meet the most incredible man, my grandfather, who I'm named after, who was an imam and had dedicated his life to God. And this meeting between grandfather and grandson was so important in my culture. My father was my grandfather's first son, and I'm my father's first son. And so we had to meet. And he just came out of the coma right before we came to Africa. And so all of the pieces were just starting to come together. It was almost like it was almost like it was written, and it was, and so I showed up, and I started, and all these questions were kind of coming into my mind, and I decided to stop, and I decided that I was going to stop skating right now. I'm taking a decision. I'm done with skating until I find something that sparks charm within me, that sparks excitement within me. And so I spent these 3 weeks in the village, and I met my grandfather, and the way that he was looking at me, the way that he was talking to me, I didn't even understand what he was saying because we don't speak the same language, but I could feel the love that he had for me. It was this, the deepest sense of unconditional love that I had ever experienced in my life. It had nothing to do with, he didn't know what I was doing in figure skating. He didn't know the results I had. He didn't know anything about my life in Canada. He just would see me as a human being and who I was, and was loving me deeply for it. And that feeling sparked something incredible inside of me. And I started to realize that this connection, this ability to love, and this ability to be loved for who you are, there is absolutely nothing more beautiful than that. And so I spent these next 3 weeks absorbing that and seeing also how my grandmother, my grandfather, my uncles would operate in the village, and how they would live with nature. There's no electricity, there's no running water, but they have this way of moving that is so content and so at peace. And I started craving that. I was like, what is this? Why am I here in Canada when I have all these resources, all these plans, all these things, and I'm miserable? I'm suffering. And so sitting with this and observing that started to guide me towards this journey of finding fulfillment in a different way in figure skating. And so I started to realize that for me, what I've always loved to do when I was, and again, I'm talking specifically with figure skating, one of the things that I always love to do is to connect with audiences while I'm on the ice, and share this story, this thing that I had inside of me. I always had that in the back of my mind, but that was never the priority, because none of that technically gives you results, and so it didn't matter. But I realized that I have this ability, and I do have this gift of being able to communicate that to people with my body. I am able to tell stories and make people feel things while I'm on the ice. And so that started my journey with moving with a completely different intention. And I started to dive so much deeper into this idea of being on the ice, but being a channel of the universe, source, God, and being able to move that through my body to help people feel this sense of presence when they watch me, and feel connected in a way that they haven't felt connected to other skaters. And that sparked this raging like fire inside my body. And when I was sitting there for these few weeks, I finally started to realize what this tool, what I could use figure skating, that I could use figure skating as a tool and as a way to communicate and as a way to connect on much deeper levels, not only to people, not only to myself, but to everything. And so that's where this journey really started for me. And yes, I was still battling, because that was yes, it was a realization in that moment, but I still had 20 years of conditioning in my brain that I had to start undoing, and I needed to start ripping out these roots that were so that were not allowing me to step into that space. And so that's where that journey started for me.
So your skating career didn't last, your performance career didn't last much longer after that trip. You started to go within, and connecting to the original purpose of sharing your story with the audience and all of that, but you kept getting these concussions.
Yeah.
What does a concussion feel like when you get you've had several of them, and
terrible.
The last one was the most intense. What does that actually feel like when you're trying to heal from that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different symptoms that individuals could feel, and depending on who you are, you'll feel different symptoms. But for me, there was this insane pressure in my head, this burning in my eyes constantly, and this fogginess in my brain and in my eyes that I couldn't get away from. And then to add on top of that, insomnia, I couldn't sleep. And then elevated anxiety. And then because of the anxiety, the sleep was worse. Because I wasn't sleeping, my anxiety was getting worse. And then it's like this cycle. And so, yeah, I had a few concussions, but you're right. My last one was the worst one. And I can obviously, I would love to share more, about that one, because it taught me a lot. But concussions are I don't wish concussions on anyone. It's really it's debilitating, because it's not something you can, like, I had knee surgery. I knew once the surgery was done, 8 months from now, I'll be back to fully athlete mode, do whatever I want to do. There's a timeline. Concussions, there's no timeline. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 24 hours, it could be 3 months, 2 years. You don't know. And so this uncertainty fuels so much of this inner turmoil that you experience. So for me, all of these, like, in a way, it served as an important purpose for me, especially that last one that I had. It served a really important lesson for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it took you a while to recover from that one too, but I guess you had this sort of ceremonial last final performance. You knew it was the final one. The audience knew it was your last one. Can you talk about that? How you sort of graduated yourself? From that aspect of your career.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll take you back to kind of the just the setup of that year. That year was it was the Olympic trials for 2018. Mm-hmm. And I knew it was going to be my last season. I knew it was going to be my last time trying to make the Olympics. And at that point, I had let go of the idea of wanting to be an Olympic champion and all of that. I started on a completely different path. But again, like, my conditioning was still telling me that I wouldn't be enough if I didn't make it to the Olympics. I needed to at least make it to the Olympics, because that's every athlete's dream. And a lot of athletes, if that's their dream and they don't make it, it feels almost like a failure. And so I decided I was going to make it my goal to make it to the Olympics. And I was skating really well over the summer. And then early September, I fell and started feeling right away these symptoms of concussion, which I knew really well at that point. But I was like, it was going to be fine, maybe a few days, a week. Like, I didn't really hit my head that much. And so I was like, I'm sure it's going to go by pretty quickly, and I'll be able to get back into training and prepare for the Olympics. And so I waited. I waited a couple of days. It wasn't getting any better. I waited a week. It wasn't getting any better. And then 2 weeks in, I was like, okay, I have a competition coming. I feel like I have to disqualify myself from that competition, or not disqualify, but pull out from the competition, withdraw, because I won't be able to do it. And so, but again, I had hope that within the next few days, like there was always like, in a couple of days, it's going to get better. In a couple of days, it's going to get better. And it wasn't changing at all. And when I say at all, like day 1 to like day 60 was the same. I couldn't be on a stationary bike for 5 minutes without then being in my room for 3 days from headache and pain. And that was like that for 2 months. And every day that went by, like, again, this like dream, this slight little dream of going to the Olympics was just getting further and further away from me every single day. And I was getting deeper and deeper into this dark place. I knew that I was operating from a different place, but I still had this tie to the Olympics. And I wouldn't feel like I would be enough if I didn't go to the Olympics. And so this relationship was just kept fueling itself, and I kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness. And 2.5 months went by, and I didn't know. At that point, I had no idea what was happening. I was really just trying to get better. But I had a beautiful gift come my way. And early on, when within the first couple of days of my concussion, I went to see my healer. And she's worked with me on energy healing for a few years, and I went to see her, and I remember she was working on me, and at the end she said, I kept seeing these visions of one door closing and 19 opening. And at the time, I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't know. It didn't register to me. Again, I was still very focused on what I needed to do. But 2 months later, I hadn't seen her. I hadn't talked to her. She randomly was walking downtown in the city. My sister was walking by her, and they knew each other. And she stopped my sister and was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm seeing you." And my sister was like, I haven't seen you in a long, they hadn't seen each other in over a year. I don't even know how long. And she was like, I need you to tell Elladj something. He's been on my mind. I've been feeling certain things. I need you to tell him something. And my sister called me, and she was telling me that. And I was like, okay, like what does she have to say? And she spoke 3 words, and and everything changed. She looked at me and she said, all she told me to tell you is let it go. And instantly, when I tell you instantly, there's no other way to describe it, but instantly, as soon as I heard the words, let it go, it's as if I was being spoken to by God. And immediately in my entire body, 1,000 pounds of weight just lifted off of me, and I got it. I understood. It resonated with me on such a deep level. I was like, of course. Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I trying to hold on to this thing that I've started letting go for so long? And why am I allowing myself to live in this space of needing to do that in order to feel like I'm enough? I am enough. I've done enough. I don't need to do anything more. There's so much waiting for me outside of this career of being an Olympian. Why am I still holding on to this? And for some reason, in that moment, it completely lifted and left my body. And immediately after that, the next day, I started healing. My concussion symptoms started going down. But I had already let go of the idea of even needing to go to nationals. I was done. I was like, I'm going to let this heal, and I'm going to go and move on and live the rest of my life. And so making that decision just lifted everything inside of me. And I found this new clarity, this new vision, and I started living from that. And then once I started seeing my symptoms getting better, I got back on the ice and I was just kind of skating around, and I was feeling better all of a sudden. And so my coach was like, well, why don't we just like try to get you to nationals, just to like do one more competition, just to finish it off. And I was like, you know what? Yes, that spoke to me. And I was like, I feel like I want to send a goodbye message to all the people that followed me, all the people that supported me and given me their time and have been part of my life. I want to go out to nationals and just skate from a place of pure gratitude. And I trained for about a month and a half, and it was hard. Because it was 3 months of no training, and then I had about 4 weeks to get ready for this competition. I gave everything I had. I just trained every day and pushed, showed up at nationals, and it was almost like a brand new, it was like the first time I've entered a competition, but with a brand new energy and a brand new space. And I couldn't believe that I was walking around and I had 0 levels of anxiety, 0 levels of stress. And I was just completely at peace with what the situation was. And I spent the whole 3 days training for this competition there at nationals, being on the ice and just feeling only gratitude for being here and having the ability to experience this one last time, and having the ability to share my passion with Canada and with the people that are watching one last time. And then the day of the first competition, I was warming up for the practice in the morning, and I started getting these visions in my mind of the stadium being on their feet, me crying, feeling this sense of fulfillment, the deepest sense of fulfillment that I'd ever felt. And I started crying because I was like, this is so beautiful. And for some reason, I knew that that's what was going to happen tonight. I had no doubt in my mind that I was getting a vision of what was going to unfold tonight. And I felt, again, only the deepest sense of love. And I showed up at the competition and put my skates on, got on the ice, and I received the most beautiful gift, and I was able to share the most beautiful gift with everyone that was watching there. We shared a moment. We shared something that you don't often ever see really in figure skating, because it's so focused on technical abilities, that I was able to step on the ice and share a part of myself that people haven't seen in the figure skating world. And that was the most beautiful experience that I could have had. And from that moment on, that was it. I was done. I didn't need to go back. I didn't need to do another competition. Everything that I've experienced in the sport in that moment just closed on a perfect loop. And till this day, I when I think of that send off, when I think of that moment, it allows me to. It allowed me at that time to continue and to move on to other things with this sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt for 20 years up until that moment. Yeah, it was really beautiful.
What's the at that point, this is, people in the skating world obviously know who you are, right? So you have some opportunities or whatever with that, maybe some show skating or whatever. What's the financial aspiration as a grown man who retires himself from competition? Like, what are we talking about? Does the show skating pay a lot of money? Or you got to get a side job? Like,
yeah.
So you hear these stories about Olympian athletes even, having to work at, smoothie shops and stuff. What are you doing for money at that time?
Figure skating is not a really lucrative path. For
right.
For when it comes to finances. If you're Olympic champion, you won the biggest competition of your life, you can live off of that for about 4 years, and you can make some money, for about 4 years, like comfortable living. But then once there's a new Olympic champion in your category, you're forgotten about, right? So there's a very limited amount of time, even for the people that are the champions of the champions. And so for everyone else, there's not much. I was lucky enough that, well, I wouldn't say lucky enough, but because of my path, because of my journey, because I found this authentic self within me, I was able to gift and give the world of figure skating something that no one else could. And so a lot of skating productions wanted that. And they wanted that in their show because no one else could do what I do. And so I was able to make a good living out of it, but I had to be on tour 365 days a year. I would go from Japan to Europe to North America, back to Korea, back to Europe, all year round. I would have to be on planes and hotels, and that's the lifestyle. If you want to make it lucrative, that's what I had to do. And so I did that for 2 years, and then the pandemic hit, and everything stopped, and show business was on pause. And so there was nothing else for me to do except sit on my couch with my wife, which was actually a really beautiful thing because my wife and I were both really busy at the time. She had her busy career. I had my busy career. So the first 3 years of our lives, we spent just like kind of traveling, meeting each other in Japan, then meeting each other in LA, then meeting each other in Europe. And that's kind of how we lived. And so spending the time with her at that time was really beautiful for our relationship. But when the pandemic hit, I spent the next 2 years not doing one show. And so then you're stuck in this position where you're so dependent on these productions to not only function, but then to want to hire you in order to make money. And so that's when I decided, and my wife and I, we had a lot of conversations, and we wanted to find a way to not be dependent on these production companies. And so that's one of the reasons why we started making videos. And the other one was because I was starting missing this dynamic of being able to share and create and express myself through movement, through skating. And so we started making videos, which I was very resistant of. I had so much resistance, and I can tell you all about it. But if it wasn't for my wife, Michelle, I wouldn't be in the situation that I am now. But we started making videos, and that gave us all the freedom that we were looking for, that I was looking for. Because not only do I get to do what I do what I love, share myself, express myself, but then I get to do that on a much bigger platform. I get to inspire people across the world. I get to inspire young Black, Indigenous, and people of color to pick up skates or to have representation within the sport of figure skating. But at the same time, I get to financially be in a space that I've never been in before, and would never have been able to be in if it was just me doing skating shows around the world.
And final question for you: how are you thinking about success these days after everything you've experienced?
Oh, that's a very good question. Success to me has so many layers, but the core of it to me is how deeply have I gone into my inner world, and how much have I understood of who I am, and how much awareness have I developed in my life? Because with that, what you can create in your life is limitless. It's infinite. And so for me, whatever it is that I want to achieve externally, I first start internally and continue to rip out the roots and the things that maybe are restricting me or not allowing me to step into the space that I want to step into, or do the things that I want to do, or achieve the things that I want to achieve. If I rip out those roots and create the space that I need to step into it, then every action I will take after that will lead me towards it. And so, yeah, in short, that's my answer.
Beautiful, man. Well, thank you so much for being so transparent and sharing your story. I'm honored again to be able to have this experience with you. And I just want to acknowledge you, man, for showing up as much as you have, and for staying true to your path, even though you didn't even know you were on your path most of the time. And I look forward to hopefully getting a chance to cross paths with you at some point. at some point soon in person.
I appreciate it.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.